How a long-distance telephone was made. Imagine living in the 1800s. You send a letter across the country, and it takes weeks. By the time your family reads it, the news may already be old. Then, in the span of a single lifetime, a miracle appears, a voice carried across a continent, as if distance no longer mattered. The long-distance telephone did not come easily. It was born out of invention, rivalry, lawsuits, science, enormous cost, and tireless labor. The spark of an idea, and a battle of patents. In March 1876, Alexander Graham Bell made history with the first telephone call. "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." His assistant, Thomas Watson, heard the words in the next room, and the age of telephony began. But Bell was not alone. On the very same day Bell filed his patent, inventor Elisha Gray filed a caveat, a notice of intention to patent, describing a strikingly similar device. For decades, historians have debated, did Bell truly invent the telephone first? Or did luck and timing hand him the victory? The courts sided with Bell, but the legal battles dragged on. Newspapers followed the case closely. Some called it a theft, others a triumph of genius. Whatever the truth, Bell's victory gave his company the upper hand. At a critical moment, Western Union enters the fight. Bell's early success caught the attention of Western Union, the telegraph giant. At the time, Western Union controlled almost all the nation's telegraph lines, the highways of communication. Backing Elisha Gray, they tried to crush Bell's small company. For a time, Western Union seemed unstoppable. They hired Thomas Edison, already a famous inventor, to improve their telephones. Edison created a carbon transmitter that made voices louder and clearer. If Western Union had won, history might have looked very different. But Bell's company fought back in court, arguing patent infringement. After bitter lawsuits, Western Union surrendered in 1879. They agreed to leave the telephone business entirely in exchange for cash and royalties. That settlement gave Bell's company dominance, and laid the foundation for what would later become AT&T. The telephone had survived its first Great War. The problem of distance. Yet one massive obstacle remained: distance. Early telephones worked well across towns, but voices quickly faded on longer wires. The culprit was attenuation. Long copper wires had capacitance, which absorbed the signal, making voices weak and distorted. The dream of calling from New York to Chicago, or even farther, seemed out of reach. Stronger batteries could not fix it. Thicker wires were too costly. Something entirely new was needed. A genius named Pupin. That something came from Mihajlo Pupin, a Serbian-American scientist and Columbia University professor. In the 1890s, he discovered that if you place loading coils, small loops of copper wire, at regular intervals along the line, the voice signal would remain strong. Why did it work? The coils increased the inductance of the line, which counteracted the capacitance of the wire. This flattened the frequency response and reduced distortion. In simpler words, the coils balanced the electrical forces that weakened the signal, allowing voices to travel farther and clearer. This breakthrough transformed long-distance telephony. For the first time, calls of hundreds of miles became possible. Building the first long-distance line. With Pupin's discovery, Bell engineers set out to prove what seemed impossible: connect New York and Chicago, nearly 1,000 miles apart. The project was monumental. Workers set tens of thousands of wooden poles across mountains, rivers, and farmland. They strung miles upon miles of copper wire, heavy and expensive. Teams climbed high poles in storms, balanced on narrow crossbeams, and repaired snapped lines in freezing weather. The cost ran into millions, an enormous investment for the 1890s. Many investors thought it was madness. But in 1892, the line was complete. A call between New York and Chicago succeeded, and newspapers declared it a triumph. Suddenly, business leaders could negotiate deals hundreds of miles apart in real time. The telephone was no longer a novelty, it was power. The power of the audience. But engineers were not finished. What about New York to San Francisco, over 3,000 miles? Pupin's coils alone could not carry voices that far. The signal would still die before reaching the Pacific. The solution came from Lee DeForest. In 1906, he invented the Audion, the world's first triode vacuum tube. This device could take a weak signal and amplify it, making it strong again. It was revolutionary, not only for telephony, but for radio and all modern electronics. AT&T engineers quickly realized its potential. They built repeater stations every 30 to 50 miles across the country. Inside small huts, Audion tubes boosted the voice, passing it along to the next station, then the next, until it reached its destination thousands of miles away. It was like creating a chain of echoes, each one just as loud as the first. The first transcontinental call. By 1915, after years of planning and staggering expense, the dream was reality. A telephone line stretched from New York to San Francisco. On January 25, a grand ceremony took place. In New York, Alexander Graham Bell lifted a receiver. In San Francisco, Thomas Watson waited, his voice carried by thousands of miles of wire, boosted by Pupin's coils and DeForest Audions. Bell spoke, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Watson, hearing the words across a continent, replied with humor, "It would take me a week to get there now." The rooms on both coasts erupted in applause. Reporters captured the moment, describing it as proof that science had conquered distance. Dignitaries, businessmen, and politicians praised it. As a new age of unity for the nation, AT&T hailed it as the greatest communications achievement of the century. The human and financial cost. Behind the headlines stood the human story. Thousands of workers laid poles, strung copper wire, and maintained repeaters across hostile terrain. Engineers tested and retested amplifiers, sometimes sleeping in their workshops. Investors risked fortunes, over $20 million, a staggering sum for the time. For families, the long-distance line was more than technology. It meant hearing the voice of a loved one far away. For businesses, it meant speed and expansion. For a nation, it meant connection, east to west, city to city, voice to voice. From wires to wireless. The long-distance telephone laid the groundwork for everything that followed: international cables, satellites, cell phones, and the internet. The same Audion tube that powered the transcontinental call also launched the age of radio and early computing. Today, we make video calls around the world without thinking twice. Yet it all began with wooden poles, copper wires, loading coils, vacuum tubes, and the relentless will to conquer distance. Conclusion. The long-distance telephone was not built in a single step. It was born of rivalry, Bell versus Gray, Bell versus Western Union. It was made possible by Pupin's clever coils, DeForest Audion tube, and the labor of countless workers. It was unveiled in 1915 with laughter and applause, as a voice crossed America for the first time. It is a story of science, money, and ambition, but also of the deep human need to connect. The next time you call someone far away, remember, your voice rides on a dream that began with the words, "Mr. Watson, come here."
It's time to study new words in context. 1. Rivalry. Definition. A rivalry is a situation in which two or more people, groups, or companies compete against each other for the same goal or advantage. Example, the rivalry between Bell's company and Western Union shaped the future of the telephone industry. 2. Enormous. Definition. Enormous means very large in size, amount, or degree. Example, the project required an enormous investment of money and labor. 3. Caveat. Definition. A caveat is a warning, condition, or legal notice that points out something important before proceeding. Example, Elisha Gray filed a caveat, which meant he was declaring his intention to patent his version of the telephone. 4. Dragged on. Definition. Dragged on means continued slowly for a long time, usually in a way that feels tiresome or never-ending. Example, the legal battle dragged on for years before Bell was declared the winner. 5. Infringement. Definition. Infringement is the act of breaking a law or rule, especially by using someone else's rights or property without permission. Example, Western Union was accused of patent infringement when they tried to use Bell's telephone design. 6. Culprit. Definition. A culprit is the person or thing responsible for a problem or wrongdoing. Example, engineers discovered that capacitance was the real culprit behind weak long-distance signals. 7. Attenuation. Definition. Attenuation is the gradual weakening of a signal, sound, or force as it travels through a medium. Example, the engineers struggled to solve the problem of signal attenuation in long telephone wires. 8. Capacitance. Definition. Capacitance is the ability of a system, such as a long telephone wire, to store electrical energy and affect the flow of signals. In telephony, it was a major cause of weakened and distorted sound. Example, because of capacitance, the voice signal lost strength as it moved farther down the line. 9. Loading coils. Definition. Loading coils are small coils of wire, placed at intervals along telephone lines to reduce signal loss and distortion over long distances. Example, by installing loading coils, engineers were able to extend the range of telephone calls from local to regional distances. 10. Inductance. Definition. Inductance is the property of an electrical circuit that resists changes in current, and can be used to control or balance the flow of signals. Example, Pupin's discovery relied on adding inductance through loading coils to stabilize the telephone signal. 11. Counteract. Definition. To counteract means to work against something, in order to reduce its effect. Example, the loading coils helped counteract the negative effects of capacitance on long telephone wires.
Comprehension questions. 1. Who is generally credited with inventing the telephone? Answer, Alexander Graham Bell. 2. What famous words did Bell speak during his first telephone call to Thomas Watson? Answer, Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you. 3. Which inventor filed a caveat for a telephone on the same day Bell filed his patent? Answer, Elisha Gray. 4. Which powerful company initially backed Elisha Gray in the telephone dispute? Answer, Western Union. 5. How did Western Union try to compete with Bell's company? Answer, they hired Thomas Edison to improve their telephones and challenged Bell's patents in court. 6. What was the outcome of the Bell versus Western Union legal battle in 1879? Answer, Western Union agreed to leave the telephone business in exchange for money and royalties, giving Bell dominance. 7. What was the main technical problem that prevented voices from traveling long distances on early telephone lines? Answer, signal attenuation, caused by the capacitance of long wires, which weakened and distorted the sound. 8. Who solved this problem, and how? Answer, Mihajlo Pupin solved it by introducing loading coils, which increased inductance and reduced signal loss and distortion. 9. When was the first long-distance line between New York and Chicago completed? Answer, 1892. 10. What invention by Lee DeForest made transcontinental telephony possible? Answer, the Audion, a triode vacuum tube that amplified weak signals. 11. How often were repeater stations with amplifiers placed along the transcontinental line? Answer, about every 30 to 50 miles. 12. In what year was the first transcontinental call made between New York and San Francisco? Answer, 1915. 13. What humorous reply did Thomas Watson give during the 1915 call when Bell repeated his famous line? Answer, it would take me a week to get there now. 14. Approximately how much did building the transcontinental line cost? Answer, over $20 million, a huge sum at the time. 15. Why was the invention of the long-distance telephone important for families, businesses, and the nation? Answer, families could hear loved ones far away, businesses could make deals quickly, and the nation became more connected across great distances.